Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to JAX Live. My name is Dr. Sarah Sterlace with the Jackson Laboratory. Joining me is Dr. Rob Taft, Senior Services Program Manager at the Jackson Laboratory, and Dr. Linda Waterman, Senior Director for Comparative Medicine and Quality and Attending Veterinarian at the Jackson Laboratory. Both are live today from home. With everything happening today, we thought it was really important to discuss the topic of risk mitigation in the face of COVID-19. There is a lot that can be done in order to mitigate the risk, especially for the research community. Both of you, Linda and Rob, have a lot of experience on disaster preparedness, so I really appreciate your time today. Before we really start our discussion, I do want to just give a little housekeeping for Q&A. Be sure to use the comment box under this video on LinkedIn and Twitter to submit your questions. Send a comment or even just a shout out from wherever you are in the world. We will answer as many questions as possible live. All right, I'm going to get started. Thank you, Rob and Linda. So specifically, what is the Jackson Laboratory's response to COVID-19 in terms of health and safety of employees and animals?
So I can start that, Sarah, and thank you for having us here today. It's my pleasure to be here. Wish it was under better circumstances, but definitely my pleasure to be here. So at the Jackson Laboratory, there's really three primary goals with our emergency preparedness plan, and that's making sure first and foremost that we take care of our people. So it's our people that provide the services and our people that take care of our mice. Secondly is our mice. We want to make sure that we're providing for our mice in the most appropriate way and taking care of, being good stewards and taking care of them from an animal welfare standpoint. And then the third is continuing our mission. So our mission to provide for the biomedical research community, mouse models and services that they may need. So just to mention, at the lab, we've enacted our plan. It was put in place some time ago, and we've enacted our plan, making sure that we have adequate supplies for our people and for our mice. So for our mice, that includes feed, bedding, and all the other different materials that might be needed to continue our work at all of our sites. So I didn't know, Rob, if you had anything to add to that.
Sure. Some of these issues are coming up pretty regularly in conversations, and the way I described it to someone recently was, if you're a mouse at the Jackson Laboratory, you really don't notice any differences. So all the normal practices and procedures are in place. Now, if you're an employee, there are some differences, and so as you all can see, we're working from home, and so everyone who can is working remotely, in part to protect all of the essential staff that are needed to continue all of our animal care operations. And so while things have changed for the humans, as a mouse, nothing has really changed, and that will help ensure that we can continue to supply mice at very high quality.
Speaking of being remote, has JAX placed any limitations on the availability of mouse models or services?
We have not placed any limitations at this time.
That's great. You know, research continuity is threatened for so many in our community, but there are a lot of steps that can be taken, even last minute, to help. From an animal welfare perspective, what can people do?
So I think it's a really good question, Sarah. And we know that individuals that are out there in their animal facilities have their own preparedness plans and have likely enacted them. And then as part of those plans, it's important from a researcher perspective that you've identified your mice that might be irreplaceable strains. You know, where are they? Are they labeled? If there are different people that are going into that animal room, do they know the mice that are critical to you so that they can communicate with you if they're noticing any problems or any challenges? And then I think that really is so important as far as what we can do today. So Rob, I didn't know if you had any more to add to that.
Sure, and I think you've hit on something that to me is really a key point, and that is making sure that you have an accurate and up-to-date inventory. And these are things that we recommend to people sort of regardless of the situation. To me, this is just important as part of the routine management of animal colonies. But when you enter a crisis situation, it becomes so much more important because you may not have access to the animals yourself, and you're depending on animal care staff and the veterinarians to be able to understand the colonies that you have and how they need to be managed. And so having that inventory information and what the relevant plans are for those colonies becomes really important. To go along with that, though, I think if you're are want to make sure that you're very well protected, things like cryopreservation become very important practices, and those are things that we have implemented now for many years for our own protection. But it's something that we strongly advocate for anyone who's interested in making sure they're prepared in case of a disaster. When you have strains cryopreserved, you have a way to back them up regardless of what disaster that you face.
Thank you. And I know at Jax we've done the same to make certain our mice receive the highest quality care during this time. We know some researchers are experiencing shelter in place or a pause or even a redirection in their research. What options are available to researchers in one of these situations?
I think that's something I can help with because I've been fielding a lot of calls from folks myself and have been working with quite a few organizations. And for those who are experiencing the shelter in place orders and trying to figure out what to do now, uh, there's been a lot of stress, I'd say. People are very concerned. What we're seeing over time, though, is that because animal care staff, the veterinary staff, and others are considered essential personnel, while you may not have easy access to your mouse strains, there's still folks at your organization that can. And as part of the disaster planning that Linda mentioned, there are always going to be plans in place to continue the continuity of very important strains. And as part of that, it also means that we usually can have access in order to get lines cryopreserved. And that's something we've gotten a lot of interest in recently. And what we've found as this is progressing is that we can still work with individual researchers, work with our facility staff, and our logistics partners to get strains out of organizations, get them to Jax, and get them cryopreserved. And so if you're facing these orders and you're concerned, please feel free to reach out to us now and we can help. As part of this, we've been proactively scheduling trucks to select cities, and that's really based on the interest and need that we're seeing. And so by doing that, we can make sure that we can get a truck in and out and pick up as many strains as we possibly can and get them cryopreserved.
Thanks, Rob. And then what about the subsequent recovery of the mice?
That's something that we're starting to think about now as well. And so my hope is that not many strains are actually going to have to be recovered. My hope for the community is that that these orders will be relatively short-lived, and that facilities will be able to maintain colonies during this time and things can resume. If needed, though, the strains can be recovered from cryopreserved material. This is something that we do actually probably at least a couple thousand times a year now as part of our own operation. So cryopreservation recovery is a very robust and reliable process. And so it's also something that in addition to this time, I'd urge people to consider as part of 3Rs initiatives. Because if you cryopreserve strains now, you may find that as your research gets redirected or your goals change, that you may not need the colonies that you have now. So cryopreservation becomes a way to overall reduce the number of animals that we're using in research and make sure that we're only maintaining our most important colonies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Jax has the genetically stable, well-defined inbred mouse strains that can be used as oocyte donors as well if recovery is needed. Linda, do you want to add anything else from a 3Rs perspective on any considerations?
Sure. Just to build upon that I think cryopreservation in general is one of the greatest refinements, that we have as far as being able to, take those key strains and then cryopreserve them. And that does, as Rob said, it reduces the overall number of animals that are on the shelf. So we've reduced the number of animals. So really very much in line with the 3Rs. Absolutely.
Well, thank goodness for cryopreservation.
Yes,
definitely. Can you briefly explain the process and how it's been adjusted, if at all, to accommodate emergency or urgent situations?
Sure. Cryopreservation is really nothing new. Embryo cryopreservation was really developed in 1972. We started our program shortly after that. Sperm cryopreservation, at least effective sperm cryopreservation, is a much more recent development. But nonetheless, we have very robust protocols for cryopreserving and recovering strains. And so regardless of the situation, the technique doesn't really change. So the lab work that we're doing, none of those things change in a situation like this. what is changing really is our approach to how we manage the logistics. So we've been trying to modify services, trying to streamline the quoting process, streamline the logistics in order to help reduce costs and help people get as many strains cryopreserved. And this really is something that we believe in. I mentioned this before, but I'll go back to it. So cryopreservation is something we have relied on now for decades for our own disaster preparedness plans. We also rely on it as a routine part of how we manage colonies. And so many of the lines that we distribute are already cryopreserved, and we recover for them for folks on an as-needed basis. So it really is a useful method, very robust, and is really key, I think, in helping to reduce animal numbers as well as protect your research.
Realistically, like how many mice do I need to give you to do a Jack sperm cryopreservation?
That is the great thing about sperm cryopreservation is we really only need 2 male mice. So 2 male breeding age mice, and that's it. So I think that's the real power, I think, in sperm cryopreservation is been the very limited number of animals that we need. So here again, reducing the overall number of animals needed. And then on the end of this, during the recovery process, it also gives us the ability to scale up much more quickly than we can from embryos.
Even with just 2 males, you can scale up. There's enough material to generate large cohorts.
There is, and so as an example of this, there'll be a webinar next week on the ACE2 model that we have for coronavirus, and that started out as a number of vials of frozen sperm, and from that we produced about 1,000 mice to really jumpstart that colony and ensure that we'll be able to provide it to folks in very large numbers.
And is there a contact that people here that are listening on this live stream is there like an email that people can reach out to schedule their key strains to get cryopreserved?
There is, and so you can reach out to JAX Services at jax.org. And so all of this information is on our website. So you have the phone numbers there, you have email contact information, and also additional information about the services that we provide.
Thank you. And then, again, I just really want to reiterate the 3 R's is cryopreserving the mouse strains does allow you to reduce, refine, replace. Cryo itself is a refinement that allows us to reduce the number of mice on the shelf at any one point in time. So that is very important. Do I have
And
other
Sarah, I just wanted to build on.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just going to build on something that was said there, I think is really important because Rob mentioned that mouse model. So because we can cryopreserve strains, there may have been work that was done years ago. And in time, that work may have not been as critical. And so certain strains were cryopreserved, and then time moves on and things change. And then suddenly we realize that some of those strains that were cryopreserved are again vital to the research community. And so in that way, those strains can be brought back. So it's really important in that arena as well that you're not having that mouse model that you might keep on the shelf for an extended period of time, not knowing if there's a need. You can cryopreserve that strain, and then if the need were to arise, that mouse model can be very quickly brought back for researchers to be able to do their good work.
I think it also gives a lot of comfort to researchers because, generating a mouse model is not easy. And so for them, even though they're not currently using it right now at this point in time, they spent all that time and resources and research looking at those strains. So to be able to cryopreserve it if they're not currently using it, but to know that they still have access to it in the future, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the cryopreservation, do I have other choices besides shipping animals for preservation?
You do, and so one of those is that we have a sperm cryopreservation kit. Sperm cryopreservation is a rather simple method, and so we've been able to fit everything that you need into a box, and we can send that out to folks as a sperm cryo kit, and then all the material can be sent back to us for storage and quality control. At this time, we've also expanded our offering. We have had just a 5-strain kit. Recently, we've added a 50-strain kit in response to folks who are looking at this at more of an institutional level and how to protect resources. And I really like this because it eliminates a lot of costs in the process because you don't have to ship live mice. We don't have to import live mice, so it makes it much more cost effective. And it makes it, I think, hopefully easier for this to become a routine practice for folks. Beyond that, though, I think there are a number of things that we're seeing interest in right now. One of those would be interested in breeding services, where we are still taking on new breeding projects. As people begin to think about pivoting to how they're going to recover, we're already having some discussions around folks who are beginning to build colonies in anticipation of future projects now that are coming along. And for those who are dealing with shelter in place orders and are worried about how that may impact their research, we're also able to do a variety of different in vivo type studies. So everything from efficacy to neurobiology studies to just the characterization of new mouse models. So we have a whole suite of services that we can use right now, and we'll be able to provide you just back with the data that you need so that you can sort of still keep your research program running, even though right now you don't have access to a lab or potentially to animals. The other thing I think we'll see interest in is the potential for us to ship tissues to people. I think for a while it may be a little more challenging at their facility to receive animals. They may be worried about rebuilding colonies. Where we may have those animals, we may be able to ship people just the tissues that they need. So I think there are a variety of things that we can do to help people to continue their research at this time in addition to cryopreservation.
Research continuity is so important, especially in times like this. But Linda, so I want to ask you, when we recover the mice, if the cryopreservation is done at JAX, what tests do we do for the embryos and
Sure. So we look at the embryos or we look at the sperm, and we would do all the same type of testing that we would do for live mice, making sure that they're free of viruses or bacteria, or any other organisms that may be of concern. Because we want to make sure that when that mouse is brought back and that it might be shipped out to customers, that it's of the highest health status. So that's a very important step in what we do.
and that's really helpful too because some people, there are some strains that they may be getting from other institutions that might have to go into quarantine, but having it come directly from JAX, that there's no issues with quarantine. So that's really
Right.
helpful.
Mhm.
We've now had several weeks of adjusting to our new normal, and so is the research community. So
Mhm.
let's look forward. So what comes next? Like, we've mitigated our risk, we're getting back into research into full swing. What comes next? Like, expanding our colonies, like, what are the next steps?
I think collectively as a community, we're still in the process of figuring that out. Um, for me, I hope there are a few things that we see, and one would be the wider adoption of cryopreservation because it protects not only from sort of these large scale disasters. People tend to think of it in the context of a hurricane or an earthquake, um, but cryopreservation also protects individual projects. And so we've all had situations where we had genetic drift occur and had a change in phenotype. We've encountered breeding issues and may have been in danger of losing a colony. So cryopreservation protects us from the large and small disasters. So I hope to see that. And I'm also hoping to see some shifts in how mice are used in general. And so I think if we look at this, for example, our ability to supply commonly available strains to the community, we have the ability to do this on very large scale. And so rather than building some of these colonies individually within an organization, or in some cases having the same colony held by multiple labs, I think we can do more to help people out by shipping them just the mice that they need for studies. Overall, I think that's more cost effective, and I think it's beneficial again from a 3Rs perspective. So I think we may think a little differently in the future about how we manage colonies as a community.
Thank you. You know, we've talked a lot about cryopreservation and risk mitigation, sperm cryo and embryo cryo. Um, Jax offers services. When did we start doing that? That's a question from the audience, from Rick.
We started offering services a long time ago now, really. I've been at JAX for 21 years. And 20 some years ago, we didn't offer much in the way of services. And so I actually was part of developing some of the initial services. So to begin with, I'd say we started with breeding services as a natural outgrowth of what we were doing anyway. Over time, as we've seen interest from the community, what I've seen us do on a number of occasions now is we'll look at what we're doing for our own faculty. So like many other research organizations, we have our own internal course. And so we're looking at the demand from our faculty, we're looking at demand from external sources, and over time we continue to add more and more services. So that's something that I'd say that a lot of people still aren't as aware of. They tend to think of us as the place I go to get all the mice. They tend to think of us as the place that has the largest variety of mouse strains, but we continue to add services fairly frequently to our portfolio. So we've been doing it for a long time, and I think it's something you'll see more of in the future.
And I know that we offer, a lot of pharmacokinetic studies and oncology studies, immuno-oncology, safety, tox, efficacy. Linda, from a IACUC perspective, do you want to add any comments about our
Sure.
studies?
No, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so we really have taken a look at that because we have our own researchers at JAX. So there's approximately 70 researchers that are very active, and they often contribute information that help with the services as well. But we're used to working with the IACUC and reviewing their proposals, which are often grant driven. And then when it comes to the services, those might be smaller projects that individuals wish to do. So our IACUCs are also ready to look at those, turn those around, looking at them closely. We need to do that, making sure that we're looking out for animal welfare, but turning around those results, those answers very quickly so that projects can move forward. So we have very active IACUCs at all of our sites. And I think they do a fantastic job of really understanding the research and the needs, asking the right questions, and helping to move the work forward. Again, that's all part of our mission, is making sure that we're getting the work done, but we're looking out for animal welfare as well.
We've had a lot of discussions about risk mitigation strategies during this COVID-19 pandemic, but also knowing that JAX is here and is offering research continuity to the research community, I think is very important and pretty awesome, actually. But unfortunately, we are out of time. If we didn't get to answer your questions, we will be sure to follow up with you. On Monday, the 6th of April, is our next JAX Live, where we'll actually be discussing the new HACE2 mouse model, the only non-human research platform available for the study of COVID-19. So I really look forward to that live stream. I really appreciate your time, Rob and Linda. And to all of our watchers, thank you for joining us. And I hope you have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.